Welcome to the Generation Open podcast with LDR21, a podcast about workplace culture and leadership that leads to transparency and an open organization. Here's your host, the founder and CEO of LDR21, Jen Kelchner.
Hello, everybody, and today I wanted to welcome you to our podcast episode with Bryan Behrenshausen, and he is with Red Hat, and he is a writer and editor for opensource.com. And Bryan, I am super excited to have you as my first guest. You know, when I first got to know you through open source, I knew we would immediately hit it off, our love of GIF images and science fiction and a variety of other things. But I totally love the fact that you opened me to this open source community. So welcome, first of all. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be. It's an honor to be on one of the inaugural episodes here. This is fantastic.
Absolutely. So for those that are not familiar with open source, I just kind of wanted to set this up. Opensource.com, that you are the writer and editor for through Red Hat, is a Red Hat supported platform for telling stories. Gives us a place as a community to talk about these principles that are changing the world. What else can you tell our audience a little bit more about open source?
Sure. So I think you explained it really well. Opensource.com is something we describe as a community-driven storytelling platform. Red Hat sponsors it. But what opensource.com is, it's really a place for us to talk about the ways that open principles, and I'm sure we'll be talking about those today, really are making a difference in the world beyond sort of the domain of software. As you know, and your listeners probably know, open source is really a technical term. It comes out of software development. But at Red Hat, we believe in something much broader, that openness is not just a better way to develop software, though it is that. We believe that it's a better way to do lots of things. And we feel like openness is more than just a software development methodology. It's sort of an ethos. It's an attitude. Mm-hmm. It's a set of habits and practices and ways to engage with the world. And so we have this platform called opensource.com where we tell stories about the way that openness is changing different domains, whether it be education or government or law or what have you. And I've been working there now since 2011 when I started as an intern while I was doing my doctoral degree, and I'm still there. And it's just been amazing to watch the site and the community grow over that time. It's funny, when we were, back in 2011, we were publishing maybe 1 or 2 articles a day, hoping to get them out because the site was so new.
Right.
We were scrambling to find there were a plethora of open source stories to tell, but trying to, we had a staff of basically 3 people trying to get the stories out on a daily basis. And it was sort of like, oh, what are we going to publish today? Well, what are you going to write by noontime today?
Right.
And now, we are a team, much more robust team. We've more than doubled in size. We publish roughly 100 articles a month on openness and open source. And we now collect routinely more than 1 million page views every month. So it's just
incredible.
It's amazing to see how the story has grown, the message has grown, the site has grown, and really how the community has grown. Because opensource.com is nothing without its community, and I like to describe opensource.com as sort of a set of communities in a community. So there's our group of folks who we'll talk about soon. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the Open Organization Ambassadors, who are a set of people at opensource.com who are using that platform to tell stories about the ways that openness is changing the future of work and the future of organizational culture and organizational design. But we also have a group of folks we call the opensource.com community moderators, and they are people who, help us look at comments every day and engage with our audience and write articles for us, and are sort of our trusted source matter experts from all over the world on issues of openness in their own, specific domains. So we've got scientists and programmers and all different types of people, educators, librarians, who are engaging with the site and lending their expertise to the community. And it's just a beautiful thing. I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's the best site on the internet.
I would agree. I happen to like it. So when did the organizational or discussion around openness in terms of organization start to come about? I mean, when did Red Hat start to notice it was either a need or this viable thing that, it's time to start the conversation?
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. So in 2015, June 2nd, 2015, our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, published a book on Harvard University Press, and that book was called, not coincidentally, The Open Organization.
Right.
And really, what the book is I call it a management memoir. Other people might disagree, but it's really Jim's story about coming from Delta Airlines, where he used to work as an exec, to Red Hat, and the management lessons he learned when he made that transition. Because as you can imagine, moving from a sort of really buttoned up, traditional, bureaucratic, hierarchical organization like an airline, which values things like timeliness and efficiency and, protocol, and for good reasons, by the way, and then coming to an open organization like Red Hat, a place that open source software gets made, and a company that's built on the values that power the communities that produce the software that we participate in. It was quite a shock for him. And he first came in, and he says in the book, and he said, "Man, this place is a mess. I know why they hired me. Now they hired me to clean this place up. This is chaos." But he learned really quickly that it wasn't chaotic, and if it was a special kind of productive chaos that just didn't recognize at first as a new way to organize and do business. So he wrote this book about the lessons he's learned, and he will speak very candidly about the book as what Red Hat has taught him about management and leadership since he joined the company. And so in 2015, he launched that book. And it was interesting because at the end of the book, Jim says, now, if you are interested, you can go to our website, opensource.com, to talk more about these issues. And you'll find a special section of the site dedicated to talking about open organizations, which we thought was really interesting because that didn't exist on opensource.com. So we said, okay, well, I guess we better build one. Because the book's coming out soon, and people are going to show up and want to talk about that. So we put together, over the course of several months, a special section of opensource.com called The Open Organization, which initially was really tightly focused around the book, because that's what we saw as the genesis of the conversation. But in the almost 2 years now since that book has been published, that conversation has transcended the book immensely, and we no longer see it as, if we ever did, a community about a book. It's a community about a set of ideas that Jim distilled into a book, but others have distilled before him, and will continue to distill as we move along. But that's sort of how it came about.
I love thinking about that community as just a place for conversation.
Right.
It really is. I think a lot of the content that's being produced right now is so valuable as conversation starters. I'm always catching a new phrase or a new line that one of the writers is using. And it makes me think about, okay, how can I go deeper in this? And so I love it. It's not standard. It's not status quo.
Right.
I thoroughly enjoy the community.
And opensource.com can and does function for a subset of our audience and our readers as a place to come for daily news to read and learn and understand. But for a hardy group of our readers who treat it as such, it's a community. I mean, people come, they see their friends publishing, they comment on one another's writing. They share the stories on social media and carry on conversations there about it. They take snippets of one another's articles, as you're describing, and then write a whole article about that in response to, Jen said, I thought that was interesting. And so this is how a community works, all guided by a similar set of passions and principles around this thing called open. It's just a wonderful thing.
Well, it's a good example as well of how, when you put the right frameworks in place for that openness to happen, how that diversity of thought starts to create this whole new element, right? And that's really where we see the creativity and innovation that can happen within open.
Absolutely agree.
So let's talk a little bit about open organization. So we know it means many things. We know that it's, there's an aspect to it that's really about the frameworks that need to be there, the guardrails, if you will, to make open work. Because a lot of people, I know with the work that I'm doing, whenever I say open, people can freak out if they don't understand it, right? It's, oh, well, that just means we're all going to have the freedom to come and go as we please, and there's no structure, and we nap all day in hammocks, right? But really understanding that there's so much structure in terms of the framework, the process, the workflow, how that happens, so people then have the freedom within that to do their best work.
That's right.
So there's some core principles that I'd like you to really share with us that we can kind of really help unpack for people today what the basic structure or foundations of openness are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you will share with us kind of those principles, I know I'll kind of throw them out there and I'll let you kind of speak to them as you will. So five things that the ambassador group has gone back and done, which is really explaining these 5 core principles as foundational pieces, which are transparency, adaptability, collaboration, community, and inclusivity as being those foundational pieces. So I'm going to let you kind of take that for a minute and share with us on that.
No problem. So just backing up a little bit, to kind of provide some context for this answer is that, open source communities are interesting things, right? And open source, for folks that are listening to your podcast who might not be familiar with that development model, is a way to develop software that is rather different from more traditional software development methods. And the way that I like to describe it is with an analogy to a recipe. So let's say that you are really good at baking cookies, and your cookies are awesome. They're excellent, and they're so good that you decide that you're gonna sell your cookies. You want to make money on the cookies. So what you have 2 options now. You can basically seal them in a bag and package them up and put them out there for people to buy and eat and enjoy and get some value out of. And that's great. You've completed a transaction. The other thing you can do is you can take the recipe for the cookies, print it right on the front of the box, and sell the cookies that way, showing everyone all the ingredients and all the methods that go into creating that product. And what you've done, if you choose the second option, is you've actually initiated something more like a community conversation, because now what you're doing is you're saying, I'm not only giving you this thing, but I'm giving you a sort of a set of capacities, the capacity to examine exactly what's in these cookies, so you can avoid dangers that might befall you if you eat them. Maybe you're allergic to nuts, and by seeing the ingredients, you avoid that. The ability to modify the recipe, right? So I see that you use this kind of flour, but I actually have better success with this one, or this is the one my dad used to use when he made cookies, so I'm going to tweak it and share that one. And so this is a very different way to develop a product, but it can also apply to software. So the recipe for software is just called source code. It's the code that computer users and everyday users don't normally see. They don't interact with, but programmers do. That's what they use to make programs, do what they do. And that code can be open. It can be transparent. It can be modifiable. It can be accessible to people who want to engage with it. And it's a very different way to make software, and it's a very different way to distribute software, and a very different way to participate in the activity of making software. But we have seen communities that crop up around those sets of practices be very successful. And so the question really is, how do we build other organizations on the principles that power open source communities and make them so successful? And so that is, in some ways, what the open organization conversation is about, is understanding the ways that open principles that come to us from sort of organically out of the ways that these open source communities work and function. How do those principles really form the bedrock of more forward-thinking organizations that could reap the benefits that open source software communities reap when they do their work the way that they do it? And so we, on opensource.com, we've been having that conversation. in earnest since 2015. And a group of folks has emerged around that set of ideas. We call them the Open Organization Ambassadors, of which, Jen, you are one, of course.
That's right. Thank you.
And those folks are people who are distributed all over the world, from all different sectors, all different domains, all different walks, who are doing what they do in an open spirit and trying to understand the ways that openness plays a role in building better organizations. And they all, of course, have different criteria for what they count as better, but this is, sort of the mission. And so they're all over the world, sort of acting as ambassadors for the ideas and helping other folks understand them. And so recently, I'd say at the end of 2016, the ambassadors got together and said, look, if we're going to really be ambassadors for open organizations and these ideas around openness, we need to have a clear community statement about what it is we mean when we say open. So people don't think that it's us sitting in hammocks all day and that it's complete chaos or there's no management or whatever your metaphor or image of it might be. So that the ambassadors got together and collectively, as is the open source way, wrote a community definition of an open organization. And in so doing, they identified 5 criteria that are characteristic of an open organization. And they are, as you just said, transparency, inclusivity, adaptability, community, and collaboration. And so what they want to do is they want to say that open organizations are ones that demonstrate all of those characteristics. And those characteristics are interdependent in as much as you can have more or less of some, but they are not mutually exclusive, and they are all sort of necessary and sufficient for the presence of an open organization. So you have to have all 5, even if they're in different ratios, and the different organizations might enact those principles differently, might put them into practice differently. But for an open organization to be an open organization, it has to demonstrate in some way a grounding in these principles.
Right. So when we notice, like you said, the interdependency that exists with these principles, if you take one of them out, do you notice that they don't work as well together? Because like for me, like you said, I love the whole interdependency comment. We talk about collaboration. I hear a lot of folks complain about collaboration.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I say, well, it's vital, it's necessary, it's definitely a part of community. If you're going to build community, you have to be able to collaborate. If you're going to collaborate and have community, you have to have the inclusivity component. But often there's this feeling when I ask, why do you think collaboration doesn't work? And the answer tends to be folks get put into teams that are either all like-minded, in meaning that there's not a diversity of thought that exists. Right. And so people may tend to, or what they've seen in their organizations are, we have these collaborative teams. Everybody thinks the same way. The work doesn't get done as fast, or it's not as innovative as it should be. Right. And so this is maybe as an example where we'd see inclusivity and community and collaboration going together to have that diversity of thought.
Yep.
Would you say? Okay. So what are some of the things that we can tell people if they're looking to start talking about open in their communities, in their organizations? What are some of these starter things that we need to have them think about to get those conversations going? Yeah.
So, and I'll specifically start by addressing, what you just said, the interdependency. I think it's important to have the conversation in precisely the way the ambassadors want to have it, because a lot of business, typically in profit-seeking firms, the speed of business is so quick today. And so people want to find bullet point solutions for complex problems that are going to propel them to whatever short-term or long-term goals that they have. And there's a sense in which openness becomes one of those things, right? We can check a box to open up our company and then achieve these certain milestones. And so, we just need to be more transparent, in other words, and we'll achieve X, Y, and Z outcomes. And really, I mean, as you just demonstrated, and as some of the work we've been doing and the conversations we're having demonstrate there is a real need to emphasize the fact that these are foundational principles. They're cultural. They are things that you need to inculcate at a cultural level. And so they're not just something that is behavioral that you tell people to do and they do it.
Right.
And besides, if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I need you to be transparent today," what does that even look like? So really, when you're talking about these things, you're talking about deep-seated cultural principles out of which an organization emerges and that are reflected in the behaviors that its people demonstrate. And you can have some without the others. For example, you can have an organization that's thoroughly transparent, but is authoritarian. So not only do they not include anyone in the decision-making process and are not collaborative at all, but they're just very clear about the fact that, they're completely transparent about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it, but nobody's had a chance to shape that at all. So you can have transparency without collaboration or inclusivity. And the same goes, for your example about collaboration. You can have collaboration without transparency. A group of people working together on a project inside an organization, but nobody knows what they're doing. They're sequestered down in a secret lab doing what they do, and then they pop up 2 months later and say, "Ha, we have this thing. Here's our new business plan for the next 3 years, and you didn't get to craft it, but we'll teach it to you. Don't worry." There's a suggestion box that's put out, and so there's a gesture toward inclusivity. There's a suggestion box, but nobody reads the suggestions that are put in it, or nobody knows what's gone in. There's no transparency around it. So you could be putting things in there all day, and either nobody's reading it or nobody knows what you've put in, and so the person responsible for reading it could say anything comes out of that box, right? So there are a lot of ways that, these principles almost need to work together to achieve the desired outcomes of an open organization. So that's really one of the first conversations I think is necessary to have is just to make sure that when you're talking to folks that they understand that openness is not a set of boxes that you tick. It's not a set of 5 discrete skills that you have to have. There are skills you can practice to be better open practitioners. Don't get me wrong, but it is deeper than that. It's more fundamental than that. And I think what people need to understand is that when you say, "I want to open up my organization," what you're doing is you're making a gesture toward really revamping the culture of the organization. And as long as you know that that's what you're getting into, I think it's a great pursuit. I think it's a worthwhile pursuit, but that's really one of the first things we have to talk about with folks who are interested in open, because it's not just, it's not superficial.
Absolutely. I think, and you actually gave one of my favorite examples I love to use with people, because I think so much of this goes back to that communication piece. It ties back to communication, the transparency, and how we do all of it. But so many industries and organizations I've been in operate with silos. Yeah. And so there may even be a measure, very little, but a measure of transparency in like, say, the knowledge sharing components within a department itself, or even within a team, but it doesn't extend across an organization. And there's so much that happens at a redundancy level, or we talk about that lack of planning. Like, everybody plans, but nobody plans together. Nobody's reviewing and sharing. And so there's just this total lack of alignment that does not exist in planning, which causes, an impact to everything from dissatisfaction with the employees to impacting your bottom line, because there's so much spend that can happen without basic, clear, transparent communication, and then the access to that knowledge for sharing. So I totally agree with you. Culture, it's got to start with changing how we address everything and go from there.
Right.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this interview with Bryan Behrenshausen. Please continue with us over in episode 2. Thanks for listening to the Generation Open podcast with Leader21. If you would like to find out more about how to improve the health of your organization, or would like information on our Rapid Change program, go to our website, leader21.com. That's LDR21.com.